Welcome back to another episode of AFL by Jellyman here on Wednesday, the 22nd of March. So we've got episode 2 of AFL by Jellyman, obviously round 1 review, round 2 preview. How this is going to roll is we'll go through the round 1 review, round 1 takeaways for each team, and then also touch on the stats in round 1. So, 35 plus disposals, 30 plus disposals, those sort of areas. We'll change it up week to week. And then also go into round 2 preview and round 2 best bets, but we'll crack straight into it. So obviously on the Thursday night, we had Richmond versus Carlton, a draw, how to start the season, 58-58. I guess we'll touch on more about individual teams, but the game itself was one of those defensive slogs, teams getting players back, unable to penetrate the offensive forward 50, a lot of bombs in, hoping for a big mark, hoping for some ground ball gets, and they didn't come as such. It wasn't much of a good flow to the game. I mean, we watched a lot of that third quarter and just saw it go back and forth between the arcs, no actual deep penetration. But it was a good first up game anyway. Some of the stats in that one to have a look at, Taranto, first time with the Tigers, 32 touches. George Stewart, 28 disposals with the absence of Welsh. Dan Rioli was unreal. 27 disposals there and a really, really high efficiency. And then Doherty and Cripps, 25 apiece. In terms of goals, you had Lynch kick 3, Kerno kick 3, and Maurice Rioli kick 2 as well. So a few good performances there. Something to build into next week. I mean, for Carlton, it was one of those ones where we thought Richmond had a better team on paper. Carlton still with a few out. So when those players do come back, they will potentially have a stronger side and a side that can beat the Tigers. But good signs for both teams early on, even though it was a draw. That was Thursday night's game. So Friday night's game saw Geelong versus Collingwood. We had the Collingwood plus line in this one. Sorry, last game we actually had Richmond head-to-head in that one. We thought they had the better team on paper. Moving to Friday night's games, we had Collingwood plus 10.5 in this one. Super high scoring game, 125 to 103. Completely different to the night before. Geelong just couldn't possess the ball and didn't have enough people to possess the ball, whereas Collingwood had the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 possession getters. So, Nick Daicos, 35, Noble, 29, Pendlebury, 27, Josh Daicos, 27, and DeGoey, 25 and 3 goals. So, it was an interesting matchup to watch. Collingwood's ball movement and pressure and the way they attacked the corridor, use of hands, use of foot skills was unreal. Geelong were able to get them over the back a few times, but that was more or less through Collingwood's, I guess, not inability, just sort of turnovers or them pressing up the ground and Geelong getting there over the back. So it was an interesting matchup there to watch, and Geelong obviously played Carlton this week. It will be interesting to see how much ball they get through the middle third there. That's all really to touch on for that one, but a good game anyway. Moving to the North Melbourne West Coast game. So North Melbourne 87, West Coast 82. Didn't get a chance to watch this one, but looking back at the stats and sort of highlights, it was mainly West Coast's inability to apply themselves. Probably the best way to say it. So, missed tackles, missed kicks, fumbly, whereas North Melbourne were just cleaner around the footy, got more of it, worked more both ways, and hence why they got the win by 5 points. Young Harry Sheezel, 34 touches on debut, very impressive. LDU, 32 touches as well. Luke Shuey was the best for West Coast with 27. Zeeble was also impressive, and Simpkin as well. But some good performances there. Nick Larkey also kicking 6 straight. Liam Ryan, 3 straight. Cam Zerha, 2 straight there. So a few good touches there. Oscar Allen didn't have much of it, but still kicked 2-2. So a good return after 12 months out of the game. The other games on a Saturday, we had Power beat the Lions 126 to 72. Not sure who this says more about the Power potentially starting faster than they did last year and having the side they did, or Brisbane being away from home and not being able to perform away from home. But it's early on in the season, so not much to take out of either of those. Just the Power just seemed hungrier for the footy. I mean, for the Power to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the top 11 players with disposal getters. It's sort of the telling sign there, and no wonder they won by how much they did. The next game saw the Melbourne Demons beat the Dogs. In that game we had Brisbane. In the first game we had no team. For Melbourne versus the Dogs we had the D's. The D's won 115 to 65. 30 scoring shots to 20. The Dogs still had a lot of the footy. It was just a matter of the Melbourne's defence and rebounding attack. Oliver and Petracca had 33 and 30. Macrae, Treloar and Libba all had above 30 as well. And you had the next four, Daniel Smith, Richards and Bont, all getting plenty of the footy as well. So it wasn't a matter of the Dogs not being able to possess the footy or get the footy or win the footy at the source. It was just a matter of Melbourne being able to turn them over and hit them on the rebound, which we did mention in our last week's preview. That the Dogs this year, it's all about their two-way running and how they defend. They've got the players to attack, but can they defend, and how does their forward line keep that ball in there with the tall timber they have? The next game, so last game of the Saturday evening, was Sydney defeating Gold Coast 110-61. We actually got to go to this game and sort of witness it. The Suns won plenty of the ball through the middle, but Sydney set up so well behind the footy and then rebounded the footy so well. It was just the cleanliness of disposal was the point of difference of the game, and decision making. Sydney knew where they were going with the footy, whereas Gold Coast were just trying to sort of get it forward, surge it forward, but that often turned over into the Swans' hands. Obviously, the Swans wanted to bounce back from last year's grand final. An impressive performance there. Chad Warner was good. Took Miller 29, Rowell 28. Jared Woods had a huge game. I think 51 hit-outs and 25 disposals there as well. Charlie Constable was also good, and a few good disposal getters from the back line there for the Swans. Moving to Sunday's game. In that one we had the Swans line, just to mention. Moving to Sunday's games, the Giants defeat the Crows in very, very hot weather in Sydney, 106-90. We had the Giants in this one, their line. It was good to see both teams being able to score the football. Adelaide, that's an area they struggled with last year. Tom Green was killed it through the middle, 37, Coniglio 32, Ward 31, Kelly 26 before he went off with a head knock, and Callahan from defence was also impressive. Jordan Dawson 23, Keys 21. We'll touch on Adelaide in a second when we move to our round one takeaways. But a good game to watch sort of the back end of that one anyway, because it was tightly contested, and GWS pretty much finished with 17 men on the field. Next game was Essendon defeating the Hawks 124-65. A good big win by Essendon compared to last year's round one performance. That's a good bounce back. They looked very attacking, which we'll cover off. We had neither team in this one. It was hard to pick without knowing how each team was going to perform. Obviously, Essendon had the better squad on paper, but just how they performed the last couple of years, we weren't too sure. Last game of the round was St Kilda defeating the Dockers 67-52. We had Fremantle obviously getting this one wrong. St Kilda, a true Ross Lyon type performance. Ross Lyon coach team flooding the back line and then pouncing on Fremantle when they were potentially unaware defensively or weren't locked in behind. But a sort of interesting game to watch with how Fremantle had plenty of the footy but weren't able to penetrate St Kilda's flooding defence. That was the takeaways from the round anyway. Looking at each team's, summary of takeaways. So a summary at Adelaide was they at least they could score this season. So they were unable to score last year, but it seems as though they've tightened that area up. Our biggest concern for them is their young defence, as well as if their midfield isn't winning the ball through Rory Laird, who's winning it and is just going the other way, which is, the perfect storm to go, hey, if you can't win it at the source through the middle and it hits down deep to young defence who can't defend too well, there's going to be goals and scores kicked against you. For Brisbane, obviously away from home and falling off a cliff after being up early. It looks sort of soft around the football, to be honest, away from home, just compared to the Power. But that might have been just Port Adelaide wanting to come out and send a message that they're ready for finals again this season, unlike last year. Carlton, their flooding defence held up strong and they looked more attacking than Richmond at stages. But look, we called that one a dead rubber with the Tigers on Thursday, just with it being so even and up and down and through the arcs. Both teams need to work on a few things. For Collingwood, they actually looked to have only gotten better. So Hill up forward, looked quick, sped them up. Also their use of hands from back to forward and their foot skills are outstanding. Collingwood is one to watch for us this season. For Essendon, their forward handball and attack was really good, so improvement from last year. But it was also against the Hawks, who turned it over and gave it back to Essendon quite easily, so hard to judge. Will be good to see Essendon against a good side in coming weeks. Fremantle, plenty of the ball, but couldn't speed up the game when they needed to, when they needed to kick a score. It was just bomb it back in, get it back, bomb it back in, get it back in. It was no real direction, kicking around the arcs, etc., etc. For GWS, as we mentioned, it's a gutsy effort. They were essentially playing with 18 men and sort of 17 with Haynes obviously on one leg towards the back end there. Around the ball, they look well balanced, so not too many people who want to just go win the ball. So potentially not getting rid of, but moving on a couple of those players, or those players moving on, it sort of steadies their midfield a bit, and they look to have played their roles, and then look forward, up forward, they look very strong as well with Toby Green, and obviously Hogan up there as well. For Geelong, it was just mainly F areas. Like, they had 70 plus tackles in the versus the Pies last year in finals, but they're only 40 tackles against them Friday. So that's just an effort area, and it's just a matter of if they're wanting to go back to back. Those obviously effort and application areas have to improve. For Gold Coast, plenty of clearances, but couldn't keep the ball inside 50, so it rebounded very fast, going the other way. And just the decision making around the ground was costly, which led to a lot of Sydney Swans' easy goals out and over the back. Hawthorn, just their ball skills and execution hurt them. They'll likely be a bottom four side in our eyes early in the season, but just building for the seasons to come and improving those younger fellas. Melbourne, they're back to it, short and sweet, but back to their old ways. They look pretty good against the Dogs. North Melbourne looked refreshed under Clarkson. A few good young kids rolling around, Larky kicking straight, and their main guys playing well against the Eagles, but also the Eagles were very average, so it'll be good to see them against a couple of good sides in the coming weeks and how they perform. Port Adelaide, they look to have taken another leap. The young guys improving once again, and also wanting to improve on that bad start they had, that 0-5 start they had last year. Would have been a big focus for them. Richmond, they struggled to go inside 50 effectively if it wasn't off a turnover, if it was on potentially a slower play. But then again, the Blues defense did look good as well, so both teams had room to improve. St Kilda, it looked like Ross Lyon had his hands all over that game plan, which obviously being the new coach he did, but they got a win out of it and were able to turn it over and kill the other team, kill Freo on the break, which was really good to see. Sydney, better by foot and up forward than that of the Suns. They did get smashed through the midfield though, which is an area of concern, but they were able to bounce back from defence. West Coast, already sort of mentioned it, application and effort was the theme. The 1% of plays, all that little things that go into winning a game of football. For the Dogs, they seemed too big up forward, weren't able to keep it in the forward 50. Won plenty of the footy, but Melbourne just obviously turned them over every opportunity and went the other way with it. That's topic 2. Topic 3, so stats in round 1. I'm just going to look at 35 plus disposals and 30 plus disposals. So 35 plus had Parish from Essendon, had 37. Luke Ryan from Fremantle, 37. Green from GWS, 37, and Nick Daicos, 35 from Collingwood. 30 plus disposal club, Sheezel from North Melbourne, 34. Oliver, 33. Macrae, 33 at Western Bulldogs. Treloar, 32 Western Bulldogs. Libba, 32 at Western Bulldogs. Coniglio, 32 also from GWS. LDU, so Luke Davies-Uniacke, 32 from North. Taranto, 32 from Richmond. Ward, 31 at GWS versus Adelaide. Sicily, 30. Petracca, 30. Crouch, 30. Cox from Fremantle, 30. Hayden Young, 30 from Fremantle, and then Warner, 30. So a couple of interesting ones to look at here. So against St Kilda, Luke Ryan, 37, Cox, 30, and Young, 30. All three defenders. So potentially when St Kilda, I guess teams against St Kilda looking at their half-backs disposals over. Also another one is Adelaide. So Ward, Coniglio, and also Tom Green had 37, 31 and 30. So that's against Adelaide. So looking at teams that come up against Adelaide and midfielders killing it there. And then also versus Melbourne. So you had Macrae, Treloar, Libba, all 32 plus disposals against the Demons there. Round 2 preview. So roll into this area. So we've always got Carlton Geelong on the Thursday night. Brisbane versus Melbourne on the Friday at the Gabba. Collingwood versus Port on the Saturday. Adelaide versus Richmond. Western Bulldogs versus St Kilda. Fremantle versus North Melbourne over there in Perth. On the Sunday you've then got Sydney versus Hawthorn at the SCG. Essendon versus Gold Coast. And West Coast versus GWS. So we'll go into each game here. So Carlton versus Geelong on Thursday night. The Geelong Cats have beaten the Blues in their last two matchups, 85-55 last season, and then 70-44, so a couple of lower scoring games. This one will be at the MCG like the last two have been as well. We like looking at this game. We actually like the Blues in this one, just with how Geelong struggled to score and also not having Tom Stewart back there as well. So obviously you got Radaglia potentially back there, but look, just that defensive Geelong scares us early on in the season. So we like the Blues in that one. Obviously we'll go through player stats as well in our analysis to our members. The Friday night game, Brisbane versus Melbourne. This is a 50-50 one for us. Obviously, the Brisbane are one of our favourites for premiership this year, being at the Gabba. They actually beat Melbourne at the MCG finally last year, 92-79 in the finals. But the D's had their hand 115-57 earlier in in August, and then back in June, Melbourne also had their hand 117-53. In those matchups there. So it's really a 50-50 one. We'll have to look at the lineups when they come out. And depending on if Brisbane can bounce back from their performance last week or Melbourne can carry that same performance from the Dogs into this week against the Lions. Just a note, Melbourne did start super well last year against all sides. I'm pretty sure they won their first 10 games after winning the flag. So that could be a theme this year as well for them. Saturday game, Collingwood versus Port. Really good matchup here. So can Port Adelaide travel and have the same performance they had last week at home last week? The Collingwood beat Port 88-82 in July last year, but then Port beat Collingwood the year before in Adelaide. We like the Pies in this one, just looking at their ball movement, able to winning at the source, but this will be a really close and tight matchup, we would say. Adelaide versus Richmond. Adelaide at home. Richmond obviously travelling in. These sides have played a few good encounters. Adelaide actually beat Richmond last season in April, 101-82. Season before, Richmond beat Adelaide 111-83. We've got to have a look at this one a bit more in depth. But the Crows could be good value at 235. The Dogs versus the Saints. Can the Dogs clear up last week's performance, or do the Saints flood back again? Obviously, Lob is now out. The Dogs have beaten the Saints the last two matchups. In July last year, the Dogs beat the Saints 84-56. Can the Saints score enough if the Dogs get on a roll? Obviously, there's one at Marvel as well. We're interested to see if the roof is closed or if it's open, depending on the weather down in Melbourne on the Saturday. Nighttime game, the Dockers versus North. So obviously North travel over to Perth after a good win versus the Eagles. Fremantle actually beat North last season in May at this very ground, 102-24. So we'll see if North can right those wrongs from last season. The Dockers actually 117, the Kangaroos 510. I reckon the Dockers maybe 1-39 might be a good value there. Or even the North plus line, just depending on how they travel with that young squad. On the Sunday, you've got Sydney versus Hawthorn. This one's a pretty easy one here. I think Sydney 40 plus should get the win easily. Not too much to say about that one. Essendon versus Gold Coast. I reckon a really 50-50 one of these Gold Coast travel. After a loss last week against Sydney, wanted to bounce back. Essendon actually beat them last year in July, 103-55. And then the year before, 98-30. And then they played a draw in 2020. So Gold Coast haven't won in a while versus the Dons. Can the Dons then improve on that performance from last week again against Hawthorn and go again? Last game of the round, Eagles versus the Giants. We like the Giants in this one, but I don't expect the Eagles to roll over at home. This would be a good matchup. This would be one to have a look at. Total points over, likely, to seeing who plays who. That is all for the round preview. Looking into the round two best bets. Sort of mentioned a few already, but Carlton plus 11.5 total match points potentially under on that Thursday night, depending on the weather in Melbourne. No head-to-head for Melbourne versus Brisbane at the moment. Just need to look into it a bit more in depth. Collingwood minus 10.5, also a few cold kickers for each team. No head-to-head for Adelaide versus Richmond at the moment. The Bulldogs 1-39, St Kilda defence likely to flood back again. As we already mentioned, North Melbourne potentially the plus line of Fremantle 1-39. Sydney 40 plus, no head-to-head for Essendon or Gold Coast at the moment, and Jitterbugs head-to-head, just need to check their record in WA. That is all for this week though. Feel free to like, follow and subscribe if you're interested in more recommendations about player stats, everything like that. Jump to jellyman.co. That is all for this week. Catch you guys next week. Thank you.